Hello everyone, and welcome back. So for today's video, we are going to do a March reading wrap up. So in the month of March, I read 10 books, and let's go through it all, and I'll tell you if I'd recommend them, if I would reread them again, and kind of overall thoughts. So first, I read a short story called A Mirror Mended by Alix Harrow. It's the same author who wrote Starling House. And it's a quick short story. I didn't realize it was actually the second book of this short story series, but I was able to understand it and get along fine with it. I thought it was pretty good. I gave it like a 3.5, 3.75 stars. Again, it is the second book. I didn't realize it as part of this short story series. So there were some things that were referencing to the first one. Basically understood it, the context of it. I filled in the gaps myself, but it probably would have been nice to read the first one in that series. Essentially, it is a fairy tale retelling. It's basically about Snow White, but from the perspective of the evil queen and how she is accepting her fate and trying to avoid it, essentially because she learns what is going to end up about her fate. So it was very interesting to read that perspective of it because, you know, history is always written by the winners. So to get that perspective of a storyline that we know so well was very interesting. I would recommend it. Again, I think I rated it a little bit lower just because I didn't read the first book of that series, but it was pretty interesting. I don't think I would reread it just because I understood the gist of it. I would read the first one though. And I think that would dictate whether or not I would continue reading on the series if there are more books other than those two. But anyways, that was the first book I read. Next book I read is A Shadow Kiss. So this is the third book, I believe, in the Vampire Academy series, and this is where things really pick up. I truly enjoyed this book quite a bit. I'm continuing on to the next book in the series. I would say I don't know if I would fully recommend this series to everyone, just because it is very YA and very like Twilight-esque era. And if you're in the mood for that, go ahead, read these books. You'll love it. Reading it as an adult is very interesting. I'm very much so enjoying it. But I think had I read this when I was in my teenage years, I would absolutely love it and continue eating it up. But honestly, it's a really fun read, very interesting, very compelling. If you like Fourth Wing, this has kind of a similar storyline as to where the story is going. So that's all I'll say about that. Very interesting, very compelling. Will continue to read and probably would reread in the future. Next, we have Crimson Moth or Heartless Hunter. So I read the first book finally for the first time this year. I know it's been very popular online and everywhere. I just haven't gotten around to reading it yet, and I finally sat myself down and read it. I firstly read it because I wanted to understand the hype around these books because the Rebel Witch, the second book in this duology, was coming out soon. And I thought, you know, now's the perfect time to read it. That way I don't have a long gap in between the first and second book, and it would be really easy. And I'm glad I did that because my goodness, that cliffhanger at the end of the first book was crazy. I did have a very good time reading it. I would say it's probably like a 3.75 to a 4 star. I don't remember what I put on Fable, what I rated it, or Goodreads. But anyways, I reread it again, probably in the future. It is more YA than what I typically read. Not to say that that's a bad thing. I very much so enjoyed it, but I was kind of reading back-to-back YA books and I kind of needed to pick up the pace. So after reading this book, very much so enjoyed it, would reread again in the future. I went and picked up Inadequate Heir from the Bridge Kingdom series. This is the third book in the series. And I was listening to the audio and I took a really long break in between, probably like almost a month. And then when I picked it up again, because I was commuting to work and I needed a commute audiobook to listen to, I picked this one up again and I absolutely devoured it. So I was probably about, somewhere in and around 1/4, 1/5 through before I kind of paused. The chapters are pretty short. Like this way through, you're only on chapter 22. So they're pretty quick to digest and to read. When I picked it back up, I absolutely devoured it. I think I finished it probably in about 2 or 3 more days after this, and mind you, it was mostly my commuting book beforehand, but then I started listening to it while I was at work, in between meetings and stuff, while I was just doing heads down stuff, and it was amazing. I don't know if I'd say I love it more than Bridge Kingdom, but it's up there. It's interesting because the main characters are different than in the first book of the series, so it was interesting to get a different perspective on what was going on during this conflict, and continuing on forward, because it doesn't fully overlap. It just overlaps a little bit of the timeline. Anyways, fantastic book. I think I rated it 4.5 stars. Absolutely love this series right now. I am on the next book now. Again, I'm doing the audio, but I'm kind of juggling books right now. I hope to finish it soon, and definitely very excited for the 5th book, or the next book to come out soon. Following that, I continued on and read the 2nd book, Rebel Witch, from the Crimson Moth duology, and it was a pretty satisfying ending, I'm going to say. I don't know if it was necessarily mind-blowing or anything. It was a little bit predictable, but that's not a bad thing always, to have a predictable ending. It just means you set things up well. I enjoyed it quite a bit. The ending was a little bit predictable, but that's okay. Sometimes that's fine with endings, in my opinion. It means you set things up properly. It didn't explicitly tell me what was going to happen, so I appreciated that. It did leave things up for open interpretation and, you know, figure it out as you go along. I again, enjoyed this book quite a bit. I don't really remember what I rated it as again. I think around the same rating as Crimson Moth. But what I do appreciate between these books is that it is a true enemies to lovers, kind of back to enemies, and then kind of back to lovers again. I don't know. It's really hard to explain without spoiling much. I don't think that was a spoiler, but it is a very true enemies to lovers, and I really enjoyed that. I would say, again, I would read this again. I'd probably need more time since finishing these books to read it again, but I definitely would recommend it to people who kind of want to dabble into fantasy books. It is a YA book. I would say it's leaning towards teenager than young adult, but that's okay. YA is such a wide range of like maturity that it's okay to kind of lean more one way than the other. But anyways, I enjoyed this very much. I love it. Obviously these are the UK covers and I absolutely adore it. Definitely would recommend for sure. So after those books, I went on vacation and I had a very long flight. I went all the way to India for a friend's wedding, and I had like a 14-hour flight. So I decided it was time, and I finally sat down and read Wind and Truth. This is a beast of a book, as you can see. This is about what? I don't know. I did the ebook because I could not carry this with me. Oh my gosh. There is, how many pages in here? Still going. Oh, okay. There is 1,326 pages in this massive book. And honestly, it did need every page in here. This is the Stormlight Archive series. This is the last book of this major arc. There is going to be a part 2 of this series, but it's way down the line, from Brendan Sanderson said. Anyways, this was absolutely mind-blowing and amazing. I was fortunate enough to get a extended excerpt preview of Wind and Truth. So I believe I got part 1 of the book. So if you've not read Stormlight Archive, it is by far the most compelling, the most intriguing, the most well thought out fantasy book I have read probably since Name of the Wind, which is by Patrick Rothfuss. Stormlight Archive is very intimidating. If you have not read Brandon Sanderson, this was my first series into him. I don't know if I'd necessarily recommend that for everyone. I actually would recommend Mistborn first before jumping into Stormlight Archive, just so you get a sense of his writing and get used to how he tells stories, and also get familiar with the magic system of the Cosmere universe. So starting with Mistborn is a great one because it's just a trilogy. It leans towards more YA. I wouldn't say it's YA. It's definitely adult, less military stuff. It's more kind of dystopian, let's save the world, hero kind of thing. It's fantastic. Mistborn is my favorite series by him that I've read so far. Stormlight Archive is amazing. This book is probably the best book I've read yet by him. And yeah, it really did need all of these pages, which is crazy to say because it's very dense. So on my flight to Delhi, it's about 14 hours, and I was like, you know what, I'm gonna sit down, read this. And I read quite a bit. In my ebook, I don't know how many pages it actually is in the physical because I couldn't carry this. This would have been its own carry-on. But on my Kobo, I think I read about 1,000 pages on there. Yeah, on my Kobo, much easier to carry than this. Yeah, I think I read about like 1,000 pages. I have a really good airplane setup for when I read books, so it was great. But anyways, this book broke my scale of stars. More than 5 stars, I would definitely rate more than 5 stars. I don't know if this is my favorite book of the Stormlight Archive series. I think it's a tie-up between Words of Radiance, which is the second book, and Oathbringer. Those are my absolute favorite of this series. This one was so amazing though. The conclusion to this story arc was fantastic. And I could not recommend this enough. But I think if you have not read Brandon Sanderson yet, I don't know if I'd necessarily recommend this as the first series that you read. I can go into a deep dive into Brandon Sanderson world and where you should start and what books there are to read by him. But anyways, it was fantastic. My mind is still kind of processing everything there. Yes, so as I mentioned, there's going to be a second story arc in there. It's going to be another 5 books. I'm not sure if they're going to be as big and hefty as, you know, the rest of the other books, but it is amazing and I absolutely loved it. So after finishing Wind and Truth, Sunrise on the Reaping released and was published. And my husband said, if I finish Wind and Truth on our trip, then we can go visit bookstores in where the cities that we were visiting and find Sunrise on the Reaping. We visited quite a few bookstores. It wasn't available yet. And we went to all the airports and tried to find the bookstores. They were all sold out of Sunrise on the Reaping. A little bit upset about that. But thankfully, because I brought my Kobo with me, I have the original trilogy of Hunger Games on here. So I reread them. I started off with Hunger Games, obviously. I just kind of wanted to jump back into the world and understand where we are. You know, I watched the films pretty recently, probably about like 4 to 6 months ago, but I wanted to actually read the book and see what was the difference, because there are differences in here. For example, Madge is a very big character or important character in the Hunger Games series that isn't mentioned at all in the Hunger Games movies. She is the person who actually gives Katniss the Mockingjay pin in here. So that is very important when you read Sunrise on the Reaping. So this was great to jump back into Hunger Games. It was a pretty quick read for me because in my other videos I talked about how this is one of my favorite books and has changed me as a reader. So it's very impactful for me. Again, it's a pretty short book, so it's pretty quick to read. I read it in basically a sitting because we were flying between cities quite a bit. And it was just fantastic to jump back into Panem and reacquainted with all the familiar characters. Sorry, sip break. And then after that, I quickly followed with Catching Fire and Mockingjay. These 2 books, again, such a big impact in my life as a reader, and reading it now as an adult has such a different impact again than when I read them when I was, you know, in grade 8 or something, when they were first coming out. Reading the original trilogy, one is like very relevant to what's going on in the world today. I am Canadian, but there's a lot of politics going on in the world that we can learn a lot about if we read books like this. And for people who say books aren't political, they need to reread some books and understand what they mean. So these books really had a big impact on me growing up. They still have a really big impact on me today. And I'm really glad I reread these books before jumping into Sunrise on the Reaping. This book is Haymitch's story of his Hunger Games, which is the second quarter quell. And in this book, if you've read the original trilogy, they doubled the amount of tributes from each district. So there were 2 boys and 2 girls reaped from each district, so double the amount than it would be typically. So it goes to talk about how we can't always take what we read or see on the media as a fact. You have to have critical thinking with everything that you read and you see online, especially because we only see a small portion of it. That goes for news, but also goes for people. What we post online about our personal lives or anything like that is a really, really small portion than what people are going through in real life. It's very easy to hide behind a screen and say things. Again, we are only seeing a small portion of people's lives. We are seeing what they want us to see. So very good reminder in the world to read about. But this book absolutely tore me into shreds. I knew it was going to tear me apart. I gave consent when I began this book on a flight. And when I got to a certain point in the book, I was like, I need to pause and wait until I'm home because I know I'm going to ugly cry. And yes, I did ugly cry. I will give a small preview here of what I looked like finishing this novel. This is me finishing Sunrise on the Reaping. But I was in my jet-lagged state of mind. I think it was like, I've been up since 4 in the morning because the time difference was crazy. And I was just sobbing reading this book. It's fantastic. I absolutely love it. I would absolutely read this over and over again. Haymitch is one of the most interesting characters, I think, in the Hunger Games, especially from the original trilogy. He has such this mysterious aura around him and we don't really know who he is. And this really gave insight as to who he is because it's his story and his point of view. I will 100% reread this again in the future. I just need to mentally prepare, or not mentally prepare. I need to emotionally prepare myself for this again. When I reread Hunger Games, the trilogies over and over again, I do tear up quite a bit when I read them just because of the impact it has on myself. It just impacts me and how it resonates with me. I'm very glad I reread the trilogy before starting this because it has so many callbacks to the original trilogy, even though it mostly covers his time as a victor and through the games. There is touchbacks into the original trilogy and we really get to understand why he became how he is in the original Hunger Games versus how he was before his games. Anyways, so March was a really fun reading month. I think it was probably the most pages I've turned in a very long time because specifically this book alone is absolutely nuts. I still can't believe I read it in only a few days. But that's kind of what happens when I travel. When I travel, I really hunker down and get a lot of pages read. I don't really watch movies when I fly, so I get through a lot of books. Also, having my Kobo, I just breeze through everything and everything. It's just so light, so easy to read a lot of books, especially when you have a clicker. I'll show you my reading setup on the plane. But anyways, if you've read any of these books, let me know. If you are thinking about reading the books but are kind of unsure and you want to talk to someone about it, let me know in the comments and I'll message you about it. And I can't wait to see what April brings for reading. Thanks for watching, everyone. Bye!